Oh, I can leave the.
I love this. I have to give my consent for the recording. Okay. Fine.
Ooh.
Oh, I
Okay,
see the
so yeah, my twin is here. Very on time, very supportive.
Wait, we were just talking about how the British make their tea.
Something has to go wrong, so I just got it out of the way.
Right.
Okay, so hello everyone. So we will wait for around 2 more minutes for everyone to join. So Daniel and Dan are actually in the rooms right now, so you can chat with them, say hi to them.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, Powell. Ooh. Hello. Everyone looking handsome and beautiful. Thank you so much.
Very, very good, Powell. You threw in the and beautiful too.
Yes. I'm talking to you guys. I'm getting nervous, but when I see this others, okay. Then.
Powell, look at that effect you have on people. That's beautiful. Give her some words of encouragement throughout.
Good morning, Powell.
Daniel, did you say I like Powell?
Oh, I said good morning.
Okay. We like him. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I saw Mia from Great Careers in the room right now. Hello, Mia.
Paulo, I want you to give us a story about a tough conversation.
Yeah, Powell, we can we can patch you in. We can patch you in. You can tell us your tough conversation.
The question I asked, I did a very similar version of this workshop yesterday, and the question I asked people was, what was the best, most impactful, difficult conversation that they've had that they're willing to share with people? Mine is always, I try to remember, I've been fired a couple of times. I think it's really important to get fired in life, but I'm still friends with at least one of my bosses who fired me. And that's because during the firing, I leaned way into trying to understand his perspective. And somehow in the process didn't lose his respect. And we still talk every couple of months.
Oh wow, that's very impressive. I'll probably recommend a good book for this. Okay, so yeah. So okay, I think we will start now. So everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to chat or do in the Q&A section. So okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Mia, and this is Employee Experience Monthly Cohort Expert Chat. I always have to take a dip when I say this name, but it's so great that I don't want to change it. So this is the 4th episode, so I cannot believe that we make this so far. So thank you so much for your support and feedback as well. And so I hope that you all stay safe during this COVID time in Vietnam, and also have a wonderful day and have dinner already, because we are going to have the best conversation ever, the best lesson ever.
No pressure.
Yes. Yeah, no pressure to you, Daniel. So actually, when this topic, so we actually list down all the skills, all the problems, and all the issues that HR people and also business leader may face up. And one thing that we see, this is all about communication first. So communication is the most difficult skill from my point of view, and I think that you will agree with me as well for this. So you will have a lot of communications, one-on-one, internal, external, during the work or during your life. And when we first contact Daniel, and he suggests the topics, and also he emphasizes leadership is the ability to host the difficult conversation and change the conversation into the new direction. I know it's very hard. That's the reason why we actually invite Mr. Daniel Stillman for today, join us virtually from New York City. And he is also the author of the book, Good Talk, How to Design the Conversations That Matter. And also he is the host of really good podcast. This is the Conversation Factory, where he invites leaders, change makers, innovators, that way he can interview them, like ask them how they actually design the conversations in their work and life. Yeah, so thank you, Daniel, for today. Hi. Again.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
And also, you can see in this room, we also have Mr. Dan Van Rosen, Chief Experience Officer at Intrinsic. So he is actually the one who introduced Daniel to me.
That's right. Yeah. So this is kind of a long time ago. I met Daniel when I lived in New York, maybe around 10 years ago, and I think when I first moved there, you know, when you first move to a new country, I'm sure Powell remembers. I'm sure people who have studied abroad remember. I'm sure the twin will remember. You know, when you first move to a new country and you don't really know anyone, you kind of take every opportunity to get to know people, and I did that by just kind of seeing what was happening in New York. The good thing is in New York, a lot happens. And, you know, I stumbled upon something called the design gym, I think. And that sounded really good for me because I hate the gym. I hate working out, but I love design. And I was very curious about that. And so that's how I met Daniel. And he basically introduced, he kind of did a boot camp about design thinking and how actually everything in life can be designed. Including now, eventually, what he moved into, conversations. And you know, I learned a lot from that. I still remember, like, vividly some parts of those workshops. And so, you know, when we were kind of planning tonight this event, and thinking about what will be the next topic, you know, we talked about a couple of things like happiness at work. We talked about job crafting, like very applicable, I think, for HR leaders and people leaders. You know, what is maybe even more fundamental than that is really communication and the conversations we have. And then, you know, it became so timely because right now a lot of companies are going through a lot of hard times with kind of like a new wave of COVID. I just saw some stats about the tourism industry, other industries really affected by kind of the new wave, and a lot of things are shutting down. So I'm sure a lot more difficult conversations will be had, maybe including some of the people on this call. So I thought it would be so great to have Daniel on and kind of share with us a little bit about his thinking. So thank you, Daniel, for being here bright and early from New York.
It's a pleasure, Don.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
So actually, I'm curious. So before I hand it back to Daniel, I want to ask you one question that you are now surrounded. Yeah, Dan. So put you in the spotlight. So so Daniel, you will have time to prepare. So actually, you are surrounded by a lot of Gen Z, which is quite a different generation to millennial, have a different personality. What is the most challenging part to have when you have a conversation with them? I mean, me or them?
Yeah, indeed. You or other Gen Zers, yes. Good question. I think what's interesting, you know, we did the big research study last year together with Decision Lab, and we looked specifically into Gen Z and the workplace. You know, what do they want from their work? What do they want from their boss, from their company? What do they want from their office? And one of the things that really came out of that was that they actually want to communicate in a very different way. So Daniel will get a bit of an insight into how Gen Z communicates in Vietnam. The fact that Mia is right here on live video is actually very rare, because Gen Z loves to communicate asynchronously in chat, where they can have a conversation and then maybe like leave it alone for a few minutes and come up with a really good answer to a question and then chat back. So this whole face-to-face or even like on webcam kind of talking live, what a hassle. So I think doing that research and like learning really how Gen Z likes to communicate and work and collaborate in the workplace was really insightful. And obviously, we're using all of that to kind of like constantly improve the places and the experiences that we build. So I don't think it's necessarily like either better or worse. Like people always try to make the generational gap like such a sort of like bad or good thing, but just different. So that's my take on that one.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay. I
that's so
agree with
interesting, by
that.
the way. I know I'm not supposed to break in here, but it's so interesting because not being on video, she has a lot in common with some of the senior executives I work with. So maybe we're not so different after all.
That's why I always say you're a future CEO. You already have all the traits.
Okay. So now, I will hand it back to the head the stage to Daniel, and to see like if you have something that can share with us and we can learn from him. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat box and also in the Q&A. So we will be back after the presentation. Okay. So Daniel, your stage.
Hey everyone, good evening, good afternoon, good night from wherever you're coming from in the world. I'm very curious. I have some good news and some bad news for you, and I'm curious which you'd prefer first. And if you could just drop it in the chat, that would be super duper helpful for me, because then we can design the conversation appropriately. You should just be able to do that right over there in the bottom right hand corner. Okay, we've got a couple of people who'd prefer the good news first. It's only
I think people that have had so much bad news over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's true.
We're some good news.
I was like, can I have the bad news, please? That's very thoughtfully, nicely asked for. I like that. So, I mean, we're after the good news, I can log out. Yeah, sure. That's all I'm here for. I don't know if you heard about the guy who like invited his whole company to a Zoom call and then fired them all. That was like, okay, everybody, bye, click, end meeting. Yeah, so I appreciate you humoring me on this incredibly unscientific survey that I'm doing right now. But we actually don't have to guess. We could actually ask science, which will actually be potentially more effective, or at least just different. And I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share some pictures with you about this topic. And so this question of should we give the good news or the bad news first is really interesting. And as I said, professors Legg and Sweeney did a whole study about this. And what they found, I think it's so interesting, is that there's actually a difference between news givers and news receivers about the preferences of news order. And I think it just tickled me that 75% of folks in general, as you said, Don, it's a strange time to be alive. So maybe we just like a little bit of good news first. But generally speaking, in their study, they found that 75% of folks wanted the bad news first, because ending on a high note can make us feel better. And if you get this Harry Potter reference, I'm so glad. If you don't, I'm sorry for excluding you with my inside humor. So on the other side, 65% of news givers choose to give the good news first. So I just want to 75% want the bad news first, but 65% of us choose to give the good news first because we want to soften the bad news. And again, I apologize for the cat humor. Has anybody here, and I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but has anybody received this type of sandwich in their work, from their boss, from a coworker, even maybe from your partner, your spouse, received one of those untasty sandwiches? And yes, Powell has. We know that. My question is, what is not tasty about that type of sandwich? I love, yeah, maybe people don't know about that sandwich as well as they should, which is perhaps good. Yeah, I'm getting some things in the chat about why, yes, it doesn't feel genuine. We know that the bread isn't really, it's just there to deliver the squishy middle part, right? And as somebody pointed out to me recently, anybody who's a high performer is generally focused on their negatives instead of their positives. So they won't hear the good stuff. They'll only hear the bad stuff. And so if you're trying to give somebody a little bit of good news to soften the squishy bad news that you have for them, they're not going to hear any of the good news. They're only going to hear that. Now, on the flip side, ending on a low note can make people feel more motivated to change. This is a Princess Bride reference. If you get it, if you don't, you should watch The Princess Bride. Just throwing that out there. And the question really becomes, what conversation do you want to lead? Do you want to lead a conversation about change, or do you want to lead a conversation that is just about comfort? It's definitely your choice about what you want to lead. My perspective, I have a background in design, and I studied industrial design, and Don and I met around this idea of design and innovation. Design doesn't just mean making things look nice. It's about devising courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. This is Herb Simon. He's a Nobel laureate. He's a smart guy, or was a smart guy. Another simpler way to say this is making things better on purpose, as opposed to making things better by accident. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be talking, we have a sort of a limited capacity for conversation in this particular place, but I am going to ask you to pipe up in the chat as much as possible and share with me and think with me about redesigning a specific conversation in your work and life. And I want you to take a moment and I want you to think of a critical conversation, a conversation with some stakes that's coming up that you'd like to reimagine. Like if you've got a difficult conversation that's on your agenda in a week, let's practice these tools and tips and techniques. And I'd like you to sketch with me how to redesign this conversation. My personal opinion is that our lives are built one conversation at a time. Every day we have dozens of conversations. Some of them are once in a lifetime interactions. Others are just in a loop, a numbing loop. And it is our job to build the conversations in our lives that get us what we want. As we all know, sometimes conversations get off track. We replay them in our heads. And conversations can be hinge points. They can be transformational points in our lives. Every conversation is an opportunity to change our life. And that's what today's talk is about, giving you some specific tools and techniques to think more deeply and clearly about how to design a conversation that matters to you. Because I believe that our lives are literally defined by the conversations we can and can't have. And similarly, our organizations are also defined by the conversations they can and can't have. If we cannot talk about something, we cannot do anything about it. As Mia said, these ideas are taken from my book, Good Talk, which is about how to design conversations that matter. But for today's talk, we can really say this is about leading conversations that matter. This is a tiny, thin, hopefully delicious slice of a lot of material that's in the book. There are 9 elements of conversations that I've defined in the book that I found are easiest to see and easiest to shift. I call it the Conversation OS Canvas. We're only going to talk about 3 of them: invitation, threading, the thread that holds the conversation together, and the goals of the conversation. Also, conversations have experience arcs, and today's arc of the conversation is, just in case you're following along at home, the thin slice. We did that, done. Talk very briefly about experience arcs. That's about to happen. We're going to go into a little bit more depth about the OS Canvas, and I'm going to give you a handy dandy acronym to remember. Anytime you want to redesign the arc of a conversation, all you have to remember is the ing of meeting. So herewith, conversations have experience arcs, the OS Canvas. For today, we're going to talk about not just threading, but the narrative. I think of them as very much aligned in the same way, and the meeting of meetings. So let's talk about experience arcs. Here's one that I'll draw for you. This is happy and maybe not so happy. And this is a tool from the design thinking world. It's a customer journey map. It's a very, very powerful way to design customer experience, but also employee experience. The CJM, as some people like to call it, super popular. And if we're to sketch out the experience arc of these two different conversations that we were talking about, giving people the bad news first or the good news first. So starting with the bad news or starting with the good news, ending on a low note versus ending on a high note. Science shows us that we prefer generally to have the bad news first so we can end on that high note. And we do for others, generally speaking, try to soften the bad news with some good news. There's a mismatch in these two experience arcs that we're sketching for other people. What I did at the beginning of our talk is to actually ask you a question about which you prefer. The question is neither good nor bad. I just let you know that both exist. I sketched out the whole arc of the conversation for you and said, there are these two possibilities, and how would you like to proceed? What I did in that case was actually to co-design the conversation with you. I didn't design it for you, I designed it with. And this is really, really important. Designing with, not for. So when we think about the OS Canvas, there are a lot of ways to think about the components, the invitation to have a choice, painting a wider overall narrative arc of the conversation, the thread that's going to hold it together. I tried to clarify the goals I wanted to align an approach. And conversations are generally made of turns. The turn taking here was me talking and you submitting into chat. And as I said, I asked for input and participation. And as best I could, given the interface that our conversation was in. So that's, I want to give you just a little bit of the OS Canvas. We're going to go a little bit more deeply into now invitation, threading, and goals. One of my favorite quotes is from the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, who said that all real living is meeting. And I just want to let that sink in there. That means that life is about coming together with other people, either remotely or in person. It's about connection. And the ing of meeting, the three components of the OS Canvas we're going to talk about today are invitation, narrative, and goals. And they are a really handy dandy way to redesign the arc of a conversational experience. So I'd actually suggest, if you are at home and you happen to have a piece of paper, let me see if I can actually find where my video is. Where is me? So this is my, here, I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I actually can see what's going on. Oh, there's my piece of paper. Here it is. This is a real piece of paper. This is a real pen. I highly recommend you just draw this arc with me and think about this conversation that you want to redesign. Think about what the invitation is, the narrative arc, and the goal you're trying to get to. We're going to walk through all three of these components, but if you'd like to sketch along with me, it'll be fun for you, and you can share your sketches with me later. Okay, so I used to do this talk at the starting from the beginning to the end, but I took some advice from my mother. One of her favorite ideas is to, whoa, that happened, is to start with the end in mind. It's always powerful to start with the end in mind. And so let's talk about goals. I'm wondering if you can think a little bit about how you can clarify what your goals are, what you want, and if you can think more deeply in order to understand the goals of your conversation partner. So this is about empathy. This is empathy with yourself, understanding what you want. And this is also about empathy with your conversation partner. This is non-trivial. This is going to take some work. And so there's at least two tools that I want to give you. First is one of my favorite quotes. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. This is from Friedrich Nietzsche. And it's really about knowing your purpose. When you know your purpose, you can work through almost anything. I first encountered this Nietzsche quote from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This sense of understanding our own why is what helped Viktor Frankl live through the Holocaust in Germany. And it's, if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, it's an absolutely wonderful and devastating book that I can highly recommend. So the key with why is, I hope as you're thinking about your why, if something came up, and that maybe something's come up for you about your conversational partner's why. There's at least several tools about whys. One of the weirdest is 9 whys from Liberating Structures. You might have heard about the 5 whys. 5 whys is great. 5 whys is usually about finding the root cause of something. In this case, 9 whys is about getting to the ultimate purpose. And 9 whys is a way you can meditate with yourself and find out what do I really want to get out of this conversation? And it's also really important to think about the 9 whys, not just for you, but for your conversational partner. Here's a little fact. Only about 7% of people who are going into a complex negotiation think about what the other person wants. Most people spend most of their time thinking about what they want. And so if you want to be slightly better at going into these conversations, try thinking about what other people want and need approximately half of the time. Don't just think about what you are going to say and what you want and what you need to get across. Think about what they might be thinking about. Similarly, this is an experience you are designing for someone else. A conversation is an experience you are designing for another person. And so the question is, how do you want to lead the conversation? How would you like them to feel after the conversation? How do you want to feel? Can you actually drill down into 3 adjectives? And actually, I think this would be a great opportunity for you to pop up in the chat, thinking about this difficult conversation that you'd like to redesign. If you can drop in how you would like to feel at the end of this conversation. And if you can drop in how you think you would like your partners to feel at the end of this conversation. It would be really, really interesting to see how you'd like them to feel and how you would like to feel. Let's see if we can get anybody to wake up in the chat besides Powell. What are some ways that we'd like our conversational partners to feel by the end of these conversations? In these difficult conversations. I'll wait one more second and see if anybody's still awake and alive. There we go. Relieved, clear, motivated. Yeah. So it's interesting. If we draw the arc of the conversation, we think, oh, I'd like to feel relieved at the end. We can ask ourselves, What are the things that we can do along the arc that can actually create that experience? Yeah. Yeah, we want them to not be upset. We want it to, so Don needs to be clear, right? If we want to get the right message across, maybe we need to think about clarity. And something I love to do is literally just taking a sticky note, writing the principles of the conversation on the back of it, and just sticking it behind my laptop and just anchoring those 3 adjectives so that I can make sure that I live those principles during the conversation. The other thing that's really important to think about with goals, one of the best professional vacations I ever took was going to the Harvard Negotiation Institute's week-long program. It was super fun to hang out with a bunch of lawyers for a week and to get better at negotiation. And maybe one of the most important words in the negotiation world is the BATNA. Show of hands if you are unfamiliar with the BATNA, so that I will know how deeply to go into this particular framework. Nice. Okay, cool. We have at least one person who's hadn't heard it before. The simplest way to learn about the BATNA is just with selling a regular item. A seller wants to get as much as possible, and a buyer wants to buy it for as little as possible, generally speaking. And somewhere in the middle, there is a ZOPA, otherwise known as the zone of possible agreement. But every seller and every buyer has a walk away. If somebody says, hey, I'd like to buy your new car from you for $1, you'll say, absolutely not. If somebody tries to buy your new car from you for more than you paid for it, you'll say, well, sure, absolutely. I would be happy to do that. And so you have to know what your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is. If the conversation goes badly, and you can't get what you want, if you can't get across what you hoped to get across, what will happen? If everything goes terribly, what's your alternative choice? And so as we design this conversation, he said, holding his sketch, like as you sketch your conversation, it's worth thinking about, what if it goes terribly? Then what? I definitely recommend, Mia was nice enough to talk about my podcast. I'll put this link in the chat later. This was my interview with my Harvard negotiation professor. Absolutely brilliant man. The world of negotiation is so important, especially when it comes to communication. There's a lot to be learned from that. The other framework that I think is useful to think about with goals is, do we even have to have this conversation? There are alternatives. So let's start in the middle. Can we change the situation? Like, let's say it's a difficult conversation and it turns out there's nothing you can do about it. The question is, can you bear the situation as it is? And we've all done this, decided that it's not worth having the conversation, and we just kind of adapt or we leave. The simplest examples are, of course, housemates and boyfriends and girlfriends. We decide we can't change them. We try to bear with it as long as we can, and then we break up with them or move on. If we feel like we can change the conversation or change the situation, the question is, can we affect the change unilaterally? Can we force the change? And it's not popular. It's not always the most durable way to affect change, but force is an alternative occasionally. If force is available to you and you don't want to adapt to the situation, maybe you can force it. If you feel like you cannot change the situation unilaterally, then the question is, can you control this change on your own? Are you in a position of power? In that case, you can do what Adam Kahane, who I also had on my podcast, talks about: conventional collaboration. That's where you get into a meeting and you hash out all the options, and a decider, gets to choose one or put their thumb on the scale. The other final alternative is what Adam calls stretch collaboration. And that's where you have to really lean into co-creation and changing how you think while attempting to change how the other person thinks and meeting somewhere in the middle. So it's always important to know that there are alternatives. You can walk away if you know what your BATNA is, right? You can totally walk away if you know your BATNA. If you don't feel like you can walk away, you can either force the change or collaborate and negotiate. So it's important to know that you can always walk away. Hopefully with some of these tools now, you can clarify for yourself what your goals are a little bit more explicitly and more deeply start to think about what your conversational partner's goals are. Now, keep in mind, we've talked about thinking about your BATNA and your needs, whether or not you think you can force the conversation. Thinking about this conversation, how do you feel like the other person feels about what their BATNA is? How do you think the other person feels about whether or not they have to engage in this conversation or not? If anybody wants to feel like they can share in the chat what they feel like their more specific goals are in the conversation, I would love to hear them. So I'm going to move on to the next component. We've talked about goals, and I want to talk about narrative, which is what holds the whole conversation together. In my research on conversations, there's the term threading is used kind of unscientifically. And as I researched it, I realized what threading means is that in a normal conversation, there's a back and forth, and one turn makes sense in relationship to another. We've all been in a conversation where someone goes in a total random tangent, and that is having low threading, low narrative use. The overarching narrative is the story people tell themselves during, before, and after a conversation. There are definitely stories that we come into a conversation with, and larger conversations that hold our conversation. Identity, race, gender, culture. And it's really important to try and think about what story people are telling themselves already. Because guaranteed, you are telling yourself one story and they are telling themselves another. And so it's important to think about connecting your story to theirs and painting a clear narrative arc that connects them. This is non-trivial. This is not easy to do. If you want to understand more about stories, there's at least 2 or 3 references, resources I can share with you. One is Kurt Vonnegut, who has this amazing video where he talks about the shape of stories. Well before customer journey mapping was even a thing, there he is diagramming one of the most popular story arcs in the world. This is Good Fortune and Ill Fortune, and this is When Harry Met Sally. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. He calls it Man in the Hole. He's a lot funnier than I am. I highly recommend you watch this 4-minute and 37-second video. I will happily share this link with you. If you Google the simple shapes of stories, you'll find it. There are at least 7 types of stories. And so it's worth asking yourself, is my story that I'm telling myself a tragedy? Is it a quest? Is it a story of rebirth? These are pretty inspirational stories. Is my partner telling themselves the story of overcoming the monster? Are we going into that conversation with very, very different stories? If I think it's a quest and they think that I'm the monster, how can we resolve that tension between my story and their story? And the simple answer is to try and listen, to learn, and to understand their perspective before, during, and after the conversation. It's also important to think about what type of narrator we think we are and what type of narrator they think they are. These 6 types of narrator, I think, are wonderful. A lot of books are written in the omniscient, all-seeing narrator, or a fly on the wall. This is the difference between facts and interpretations. We may think that we are omnisciently reporting the facts. Our partners may think that we are an unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrators are wonderful. They're great stories to read. They're not great stories to live. And so it's really important to try and determine whether or not we are being judged as omniscient or unreliable. The best type of narrator to be is to go first person and say, just to use I statements. I know that there were some questions that came in before this session, and one of them was about how to deal with rumors that someone feels like they have to tell someone else about. And it's a hard situation, but coming at it from an I perspective and to own your own feelings and your own experience about it and what you want for that person is really important. I, first person, is always a safer narrator to work with. I love this poem. It's a little weird, but in terms of trying to understand the thread, I think it's a beautiful concept that there is a thread that you follow and it goes among the things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. We've all had the experience of meeting an old friend who we haven't seen for years and years, and we can pick up that thread very, very easily. In work stories, having a clear story that we don't have to explain again and again is hard. And that's why it's important to be simple, direct, and clear. And I'm going to give you an example. Show of hands, if somebody sends you a text or an email that says, "Can we talk?" Who would feel nervous? I would love to hear from the chat. Who would be excited? Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Dan and Mia. I appreciate that. Who'd be like, oh, yeah, everyone gets nervous. There's a reason for this. It's because we have survived for 40,000 years as modern humans. We are always on the lookout for danger. It's part of our job. We're trying to stay alive. It's hard to do. And so when somebody says, "Can we talk?" what we feel is like, oh my God, I'm totally going to get kicked out of the tribe. Somebody's going to break up with me. This is not going to go well. So, hey, can we talk? I'd like to give you some feedback. I don't know about you, but now I'm even a little bit more nervous. I'm like, oh, no. Who wants to go to this meeting? Show of hands. Anybody want to go to this meeting? I'm like, maybe not. But if they say, okay, I'd like to give you some feedback about, and they start to tell you what they want to give you feedback about. Now, at least I know like what the meeting's going to be about. And maybe this last one makes me feel like, okay, the blood in my veins is cooling down based on some recent mixed reviews from some clients. I would love to help you improve on some key skills. When's a good time to chat about that? Who feels comfortable going to that meeting? Maybe even excited. It's nice. Thank you. I mean, it's like, that is nice. Oh, they're not going to fire me. They just want to help me grow as a client services professional. Yeah, it's like, I'm now curious. Oh, well, what are the recent mixed reviews? Now, it would be even better if they were like, oh, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it too. Luke, you're absolutely right. It does depend on the sender 100%. This is situation, behavior, and impact. SBI, some people love it, some people hate it, but it is a handy acronym if you want to help people understand at the beginning of the arc of a conversation why you want to have a conversation at all. It's a way of explaining what the overarching narrative is. What's the situation? What behavior did you see? And what's the impact on you? That's the safest way to try and explain to somebody the narrative of what's going on before you get into the conversation. What's the situation? What's the behavior? And what's the impact? I'm a huge fan of clarifying the large arcs and the small arcs of a conversation. So, hey, this is the feedback I want to give you. That's the big arc. Here's the situation, here's the behavior, and here's the impact. And then there are little arcs, like I want to talk about the feedback, and I want to know what you think, and I want to talk about what we're going to do about it together. That's being really, really helpful. If you actually even just send the agenda to somebody and make it totally clear, this is what's going to happen at this conversation, and my goal is to help you improve. That is a total invitation. And that's connecting one arc of the conversation to the other and threading it all together clearly. So, story. What story are people telling themselves already? How can you connect your story to theirs? And how can you paint a clear narrative arc that connects them? The last thing I want to talk about is the invitation. This is maybe the most important one. I think invitation is what brings people into the conversation, right? And designing a powerful invitation is about creating that arc into the conversation that gets somebody to stop doing whatever they were doing and to say yes to the meeting invite, to open up the envelope and to come to the party. The way I think about invitation was inspired by James Carson's book, Finite and Infinite Games. Drop in the chat if you have not read this book. This is one of like my top 3 books that I think everyone should read. I can give you the basic idea in a sentence. As James Carse points out, there are at least 2 types of games, finite games and infinite games. And finite games are ones that start and stop and that have a winner and a loser at the end of them. And infinite games are ones that we change the rules of to keep playing. Classic finite game: soccer, baseball, presidential elections. Not included in finite games are marriage and friendship. Those are infinite games. We change the rules. Oh, I think I know what happened with that. Thank you for somebody telling me about that. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to start sharing again. And I'm going to change my video too. I think I clicked on it and it zoomed in. Is that better, everyone? Let me know. Bringing up the chat so I can find out. I see a great. No, wait. Better now. Okay, great. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you letting me know. Okay, so finite and infinite games. We change the rules to keep playing. Play is really important. Play is the core of everyone as a human. Inside of every adult is, in fact, a child that just loves what they love. And this is where it's very important to design the invitation with respect to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is one that is direct. Extrinsic motivators are indirect. So if you want to get the best out of people, you try to evoke their inner child. You try to speak to their need and desire to play. Everyone loves what they love. Most of us try to resort to indirect motivators. To try and get someone to the table, we try to use emotional blackmail. Your mother will be heartbroken if you don't come to the family dinner for the holidays. If you don't do this, we're going to reduce your salary. Look, this is the way it has always been done, right? Can't you just get along with the program and just do what has always been done? These are not very powerful motivators. Saying, hey, this speaks to our purpose and our shared purpose together. I'm going to stop and reshare again. I hope that works for, I see at least one more person has a black screen. So I'm going to find out if this works. for our last panelist who can't spot it. Just want to make sure that that works, because I am sharing my screen. Toa, can anybody else tell me that if this is working? Because, you know, technology. So as I was saying, yeah, okay, phew, thanks. That's great. That's important. So here's the thing. We always, it's very habitual. This is the patriarchy, and this is not. Potential, purpose, and play are ways of trying to get the best out of people. And it very often, it is very hard. It is much more challenging to try and evoke those motivators, but we will get the best out of people every time. It's how you get the best out of folks. So I'd like you to bring your insights and your empathy together and think about what invitation would actually get people to the table. How can you make the conversation intrinsically motivating to your conversational partner? How might you appeal to play or purpose? This is really, really essential. As I said before, this does not come for free. This is not easy to do. There is no quick fix for this whatsoever. If you have sketched out this new design for this difficult conversation that you've put together, I would love to see it. I would love for you to share it with the team. Hopefully we can figure out a way to do that. One last set of mental models that I'd like you to think about with me is one of my favorites. This is a bonus, is what I call the conversational leadership matrix. As you think about this important conversation that you want to engage other people in, which quadrant is the conversation in now, and where do you want to lead it? And how can you invite that shift? And I'm going to share a little bit about the matrix. Is this in an asking or a telling domain? Or are you focusing on a problem, or are you focusing on the solution? And so I would call the upper left-hand quadrant the humble inquiry quadrant. I'm a huge fan of the book Humble Inquiry, which was written by a man named Ed Schein. I'm also a fan of a coaching mindset where you ask people about what solutions they want to try or have tried. We're focusing on solutions instead of problems. Or you might be focused on telling people about the problem, which is where the book Radical Candor might help you. Or you might want to tell people about the solution that you think needs to exist. So this is where I want to actually stop for a second. I'm going to leave the slide up, but this would be a great opportunity for you to share. This is a from to analysis for your conversation. Where do you feel like the conversation is now, and where would you like to bring the conversation in order to transform it? What quadrant would you like to bring your difficult conversation into? I'd love to hear from a couple of people where you'd like to take this conversation. Yeah, so in the metaphysical and more metaphorical sense, Pavel, emotionally and logistically. And with that, actually, I'm just about finished. As I said, our lives are built one conversation at a time. They're defined by the conversations we can and can't have. And I really, really hope that all of you find an opportunity to change the invitation, to investigate the stories that you and others are telling, and to think clearly about your goals and your conversational partner's goals, to design a conversational arc that you think will transform how things are, and to get more of what you want in your life and in your work. as we said, we have a little bit more time. I'm finished a little early, which is great, which means that we can have a conversation. I know there's a whole bunch of questions, and we can try to address as many of them as we can. And as Don said, we can have people come up on video and talk about some of these things too.
We can,
Yes.
yeah. But I think Mia has a very important question.
Oh, actually, I want to thank you first for your sharing, because it reminds me a lot when I take the master course, and the first subject is interpersonal, and it's talk about communication, negotiations. So I think it's negotiation is like the mind game. It's like the battles when you want the win-win situations that happen.
Yes.
And then and then it reminds me a lot when you talk about Batna. Yeah, and totally can feel that. And I already skipped out everything that you said in here.
Nice.
Yeah, one thing about it first, because like as I learn, as I know that the more you know about the person that you communicate with, I mean like the more you know about their purpose, their motivations, the more that the chance that you can win that conversation. So
yeah,
I actually I want to ask a really tough question. Is like you will have a lot of conversation that you will have to say no to others. I mean, like so I want to know more about like how can you say no politely. So because like say no is like you want to save the relationship, you want to save the deal, you want to save the conversation, but also want to say no. So how can me and other people like do it really politely?
Yeah. So I mean, it's a really interesting question, Mia. I've had a couple of people say no to me in really nice ways, and usually it's important to realize that they are communicating that they're saying yes to other things. They're not saying no to me. So like when I was writing my book and I asked some people for a blurb, they were like, "I'm really sorry, I'm working on my own book," or "Hey, can you come on my podcast?" They're like, "Sorry, I'm really busy for the time being. Reach out again in 6 months," right? And then they have to come up with a new reason to say no, of course. But if you look at like Tim Ferriss does this, and there's some other people that are like, "I am not reachable, and this is why. You will not be able to reach me." And that is because I'm working on things that I want to work on. A really good friend of mine has an auto email responder where she says, "Due to the human-centered nature of my work, I do not check my email regularly."
Oh.
She's like, "I spend all of my time working live with clients as much as possible, and don't expect a response within 2 weeks." And you know what? God bless her for designing her life in the way that she wants to. I think saying no to the person, as you said, it feels like it. I feel like we don't want to hurt the person's feelings. It's like, so I think acknowledging the request and then telling them what you're saying yes to. Right. So the invitation is, "Hey, would you like to come to do this thing?" And they're like, "Well, here's this other thing that I'm inviting myself to do. Here's my purpose. Here's my potential. Here's where I want to play. And what you want doesn't align with what I want." It's actually being clear about it. It's not saying your podcast isn't important, but they're saying my thing is more important to me right now.
So instead of saying no directly, you can like give others a reason, acceptable reason, and also a reasonable reason, I think. Yeah.
Well, give them your own reason about what you're saying yes to. You're like, "I can't say yes to that because I'm saying yes to other things. Here's where I'm spending most of my energy right now. I'm so sorry that what you have need of for me doesn't align with that."
Yeah, that's very interesting. And yeah, I will learn that to say no to them in some way.
I was gonna say, I know who's on the receiving end of that no, but you know what? In your case, I don't mind.
It's a joyous no. Find a joyous no. Like, "Oh, that's such a nice request. Thank you." Like thanking them for the invitation is powerful. Say like, thank you so much for the invitation. I can't say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, like we're speaking of the negotiations. So there's one question that's something. This is a really tough conversation to the HR people as well. Is that like how to manage performance, salary review?
Yeah.
Conversation. So especially during the COVID-19 with lots of financial difficulty.
Yeah. I think there's two things that are worth thinking about. One is just our own conflict capacity. It's a term, I don't think I came up with the idea of conflict capacity, but just our willingness to be with difficult emotions and difficult situations. It's pretty low. I mean, I don't know what it's like for the rest of the world. Americans like to be sort of happy-go-lucky and just erase. There's a book by Barbara Ehrenreich called Bright-Sided, where she talks about how Americans just love to, it's like, oh, you have cancer, good luck fighting it, you know? Right? This is what we do. And you can see this like, oh, you know, I'm sorry for your loss, but like, I hope he's in heaven looking down from us. And that's a comfort to you. It's like, well, no, it's actually not, because I would like him here with me now. Right. So these are the responses we have naturally in many cultures to pain, which is solace. We think that solace is what we do for pain. We try to soften the pain, whereas feeling the pain and experiencing the pain can actually be the way through the pain. I know that's not a really nice way to think about this, but to say like, hey, look, I have some terrible news for you, and I want to talk about how it's going to impact you and what we're going to do about it.
Oh,
like,
direct.
So I mean,
so
it's like,
that's how you're leading the conversation. You make it more like very straightforward, and also like take a look at the bright side. I mean, like this is a tough situation, but we have deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, look at the bright side a little bit, but actually make space for the difficulty. I know this is going to be hard, and we're going to be here with you through it.
Yeah.
It sounds like that means that there needs to be a lot of trust between the person giving and receiving the news.
Yeah, and how do we create trust and earn trust, right? That doesn't come for free. Right? You can't just manufacture trust. You can manufacture transparency. You can be transparent. You can try to be trustworthy. You can try to be direct and clear. You can even acknowledge that people might not believe you or trust you. So like, look, I know that we've screwed with you in the past, but no. And I know that we've gone back and forth on this, and I might be really unclear about what's going on, but I want to just lay it all out for you.
Yeah.
That's the invitation to the goal. Like, I want to be as transparent with you as possible. Look, I mean, the thing is, we get what we can negotiate for ourselves. We can get what we say. Our lives are lived one conversation at a time. It's like I say it over and over again, but it's like, if we can't talk about it, it's not going to happen. And so that's where I think conflict capacity is really important, right? Just the ability to be with difficult emotions and not to run away from them. The other is just curiosity about what the other person's thinking about and hearing and experiencing, asking to learn and trying to empathize with what the other person's going on with them. So like saying like, hey, what have you heard about what's going on so far? Like, what do you know? Like, just trying to get a sense of what people might be experiencing with that difficult conversation. I think those are all things that could be useful.
Yeah. I think
we're always like tiptoeing, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want this bad conversation to happen. Oh, I'm so sorry. But if you lean into it, it's going to be better. Sorry, Don, I totally cut you off.
Well, you were making my point for me, so it's okay. I think, you know, like that is kind of like, there is a clear reason why to do that. But I think especially here, you know, and I went from Europe to the US and then finally to Asia, it's a very, you know, indirect culture. You know, if you the culture map, like these are kind of like polar opposites almost, right, culturally, where actually all information is conveyed very kind of like indirectly, and you would never really be so straight. which is, why sometimes I think, especially for people from outside of Vietnam coming here, is quite difficult to find the right way to engage. And actually, one of the questions that was submitted was from Powell, who by now is famous because he was so active in the chat. I'll read the question, but I've also unmuted him in case he wants to give context. But basically, the question he submitted was, what are the best ways to give feedback? So there you go. And how to clearly set expectations with an employee as an ultimatum for them to stay in the company. Powell, you want to deliver any context to that very, very interesting question?
Hey there. Thanks for bringing it up. The second one, right? That was, I'm trying to remember what I was. Yeah. Sometimes I think we feel with some of our team members that there's many reasons for them to stay, but there's some reasons for them that they don't fit in our sort of expectation and plan for the company, right? And we want to communicate that to explain to them that there is a chance that they may need to go, but we still want them to stay, right? And but there's some but there's some condition for that, or something that we need to prove, right? So I'm just curious, seeing the topic of the today's webinar, that's something that came to my mind to ask.
That's a tough one, dude. Because
that's why we're asking the expert, no?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert. I'm just a nerd. I mean, you're the expert in your situation. What do you think would actually happen if you delivered an ultimatum to them? Would it make them feel like they want to improve and stay?
I think it's about how, right? I think one of the value that I have or my team has is to be genuine. So we want to, and open communication is another one, right? So if something is really there that we need to change, then I want to be transparent about it. And if there's a risk that if it doesn't change, then the person will need to go, then they should know about it, so it's not a surprise later. At the same time, I think there are ways to deliver that message that can go both ways, right? Either positively and leave the person motivated and give us the chance, or we can do it very poorly and end the relationship there.
Yeah, I mean, so this is where the conversational leadership matrix, I think, can be helpful. Telling somebody about the problem and telling them the solution is a direct path, right? That's saying, like, I'm just going to be radically candid and say, like, look, we think you're not a fit, but maybe you are. And if you can do X, Y, and Z, then we'll feel really good about you staying. Right? That's sort of like it sounds like that's the conversation you're sort of mapping out, Pavel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
or sort of that we maybe don't have evidence for some things that we expect, or like those behaviors were not observed.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe this is where I think I'm just a big fan of the humble inquiry quadrant, and say, like, hey, like, what are some things that you're noticing? Like, how do you feel like you are a fit? Can we have a conversation about how things are going? Like, how are you, what things are working for you about being here? What are some things that you don't feel like are working for you? And then maybe I can share some of the things that I'm feeling too. I can yes and that. Well, are those some things that you think we'd like to work on together? Like, what are some things we could try to make it feel like you feel like we're both a match and this can work? This is where we start to get into coaching. There's nothing wrong with direct if you really know what the problem is. But this is where the challenge of the narrator exists. What story are they telling themselves? We don't know. What story are they telling themselves about what is going on in their experience of your culture? Are they unaware of it, or are they aware of it? I believe in Newton's laws, my first degrees in physics. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. And so like, if I'm feeling nervous, that's usually because someone else is feeling nervous. Like if I'm like, I don't know if this is working out, like maybe they're wondering that too. Maybe they noticed that I'm noticing it. Or am I noticing them, noticing me, noticing them, noticing it? I don't know. But we haven't asked. So that's why I love the asking about the problem. What's happening? Like, what are you noticing? What is going on for you? Like, this is why annual reviews are just way too slow. Right? Like, we're supposed to have once a year give you 360-degree feedback. So I don't know, Paul, does any of that resonate with you?
It does resonate. I think some situations it works out better for me, and some worse. So what I mean, like from this sort of inquiry mindset, sometimes I say, okay, tell me how do you see that situation? And then if I don't deliver that message right, then the person would say, okay, you want to tell me some feedback, just say it.
Right, because they can sniff out that you've got an agenda.
That there's something that I'm not comfortable with, right?
Yeah, well then you can own that. You're like, yeah, you're right. I'm sitting with some stuff, but I really do want to know how you feel about this. Like they're both there. Like you really do. Like, look, I'm not 100% comfortable about how things are going right now. Like, how do you feel things are?
Yeah. I think what helps
is
the
sort invitation
of
for like you can. So when I say designing the conversation, it's like the dial is directness versus and curiosity. Maybe here where we're like trying to like just turn this dial, and you feel like if I'm just curious, they will sniff out that I actually want to be direct about something. But I'm saying maybe you'll win some connection points with them by being curious first and asking to learn and trying to find a way to create psychological safety for them. Asking to learn, humble inquiry does create some psychological safety. The real question is, what would make, if you really do think that there's a long-term possibility with this person, what would help foster that end? Like, this is starting with the end in mind. Right. Listening to my mother, which is always a good idea. Just ask my mother. Like, so presuming that things worked out, a year from now, they've stuck around and things are working out great. What did you do to make it possible? Because the way you're going, like, I think it's very easy that will backfire. I can't imagine like saying to a girlfriend, look, things are great, but there's a couple of things I really want you to fix for us to stay together. Like what person in their right mind would stick around in that relationship?
There's actually a related question from Anne, which would be interesting to think about too, which I think a lot of people run into. How to persuade someone with a fixed mindset?
It's a great question. And I have a great question back for you. Like I said, if there's any wisdom, actually I didn't say this, if there's any wisdom in my book, it's from other people that I've interviewed. So that's the interview I have with Robert Bordone. I want to find a link for, I interviewed Nancy McGaw, who works at the Aspen Institute. And I learned her favorite question to help deal with naysayers. And the question is, what would have to be true? So if somebody's like, that'll never work. It's impossible. She's just like, well, what would have to be true in order for that to work? And as she says in this conversation, great questions require great silence and great space. And I agree with her 100%. And so if you say what would have to be true in order for that to be the case, let them do the thinking. You think that we have to do all this work to change someone's mind, whereas asking a powerful question is an opportunity to let them see if they can change their own mind. And so if you say like, hey, if they say this will never work, that's a classic fixed mindset. Like, there's just no way that will work. You're like, well, what would have to be true? Well, I mean, the customer would have to be able to agree to this, and like this technology platform would have to work, but that'll never happen. You're like, oh, well, what would have to be true in order for the technology platform to change? Well, I mean, the CIO would have to agree to this, and we'd have to get like 5 more programmers. Oh, well, what would have to be true in order to get the CIO and 5 more programmers on this? Like, well, that'll never happen. We'd have to talk to the budget guy and get him on board. Like, well, how do we get the budget guy on board? Like, what would have to be true to get the budget guy on board? I mean, do you see what I mean, Don is laughing along with, it's like they're brainstorming options.
Yeah.
That's the classic fixed mindset, is there are no options, but good, bad, yes, no. And Powell, you have a fixed mindset about, you're like, either I'm going to do this or that. Like, there's only 2 options. There isn't a third one. Fixed mindset.
We're kind of like live troubleshooting here, because Ngop Anne is saying that she's actually on a call with a stubborn client right now, and therefore she can not live on this call. So it's like, you know, Ngop Anne, it sounds like you just have to ask, what would have to be true for you to?
Yeah, what would have to be true in order for this to work?
Yeah.
By the way, I'm just doing the thing that I should do, which is putting all the links in for you, so you can grab them all from the chat and stop paying attention to the talk and go listen to them.
We'll share them in the follow-up email tomorrow too, because I think that there's just so many things that we've kind of dipped into, kind of like getting that slice of the pie that I'm sure people would love to learn more about. Mia, maybe there's time for one more question, and then people here probably need to go to sleep, unless they're Gen Zers who stay up until 2 a.m. Daniel probably needs to get to work as well, so.
It's actually like have really good questions from Vanessa from Ogilvy that I want to ask. This is the last question, I promise. I won't bother you anymore. This is can you share with me some tips that on how to give a straightforward type of conversation for those who may understand concepts but do not know how to get started? I mean, basically how to get started.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the slide that I shared about I want to give you feedback on this so that we can right? It's embedding the purpose and the potential in the feedback. I think that's what makes it, like, feedback is like, here's something you did wrong, but linking it to the next conversational flow, the next conversation, I think is what makes it feed forward for me. I'm no expert on it. Marshall Goldsmith, I think, invented the term, or at least he's made videos about it. But to me, feedback is just focusing on the past. Feed forward is thinking about, what are we going to do with this? Why does it matter? It matters because I'm excited for you to stay with the company, and I want you to integrate some of these lessons so that we can work well together. Powell, not for nothing, maybe you need to give some feed forward to this person. Like, if you believe.
Yeah. A very good consultant and very interactive communication happening right now. That was really cool. Yeah.
I know as far as Americans go, I'm extra direct. Somebody said about my coaching style, they're like, you really go to the big questions like right away. I'm like, well, you know, we don't have a lot of time, so let's go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I mean, like the way you asking questions, when someone have problem and then you asking questions back for them to realize that problem that they have by themselves. Yeah, it's really cool. I want to learn that.
So just to be really clear, like when I say designing conversations, I mean, you get to choose, regardless of what culture you were raised in. If you want to be soft and indirect, be soft and indirect. If you think that's going to get you what you want. If you think that being firm and clear will get you what you want and need and help the other person as well, do that. You get to design the conversation. I mean, the Culture Map is a great book, but I believe that we are all as different inside of one country, inside of one gender, inside of one culture than we are from like the net. There's no like average Vietnamese person, right? There's no average American. I'm from America, but I'm not. I'm from New York City. I'm a totally different type of person, right? So you can't say, oh, Americans are like this. Like, are we? Like Texas, Louisiana, California, and New York? Like, are you kidding me? You're going to tell me that some country bumpkin who lives down on the river in Vietnam is the same as somebody living in the middle of Ho Chi Minh City? They're not. They're different. They have different mores. They have different cultures that they're living in, which is why you have to figure out what the person in front of you needs and what you want, and then to design an approach that's going to hopefully work. Cross your fingers.
Hopefully work. So yeah,
Then
so
learn.
so thank you so much, Daniel, for this sharing. And also I hope that Powell, now you will know how to best way to give feedback. And Ngọc Anh, I hope that you already can deal with your stubborn clients. Yes, by using this. Yeah, and to sum up this really good topics and really good sharing is that actually I listened to one podcast, and I think this opinions is really cool. Is that like even that no matter what nationality, genders, or even internal or external, that it's really nice to respect other people's opinions when you communicate with them. Yeah, so I think it's really great. Yeah, so thank you so much. And if I will send you the recording and all the links that Powell send you in the chat box right now. You will receive it tomorrow. And if you have any questions, so we are so sorry because this time off. But if you have any questions, please feel free to give Daniel through his LinkedIn or an email. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining with us today.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yes.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. Hope you slide into the weekend like whatever meme you like.
Okay, have a nice day, Daniel.
Yeah,
thanks. Really appreciate it, Don.
Thank you
for
so
such
much.
a pleasure.
Okay, bye.
Take care.